Welcome to Film and Page. I'm Dominic. So, you've read Frank Herbert's Dune, and you're thinking, should I read past the first book? Maybe you've made it as far as Children of Dune, and you're wondering if you should read on. This is a question that has come up many times in the comment section of my channel, so much so that I've decided to make a video on the subject. While it is a question I don't think I can answer for someone else because everyone has their own tastes, what I hope I can do is shed some light on the series of books, and maybe that will help someone make a more informed decision. I've decided that there are 4 jumping off points when it comes to the Dune series of books, and really, in my opinion, only one jumping on point. Also, I'll talk about where the story ends as far as official canon goes, and I'll talk about personal headcanon. Also, I'll discuss books in the series that I personally consider to be supplemental but unnecessary to the main saga. The only real jumping on point, in my opinion, is Frank Herbert's Dune. It's the book that started it all, and it was the book that all the others spun themselves from. It could be possible to jump on at another point in the story, but I think it is best to start here. Also, this brings me to the first jumping off point in the Dune saga. Dune is a book that can stand on its own as a standalone science fiction book. It can be enjoyed as a one-off story, and many people have enjoyed it that way. So you could, in theory, just read the first one and get all you need from it. However, if you've read Dune and really enjoyed it, there is more to the story. So much more. When I first read Dune, I loved the book. And about a year later, I reread Dune, then ordered Dune Messiah and Children of Dune. As soon as I got them in my hands, I read them both back to back. In my opinion, that is how I think you should read both of these books, back to back as if you are reading one book, because I feel like they are one book that got split in half. Now, should you stop here? There is a story that I've heard a few times about Frank Herbert, that he never had any intention of extending the story of Dune past the first 3 books. However, due to pressures from publishers for him to continue the story and his need to make more money, he went on to write the other 3 books. How much truth there is to that story, I don't know. With this information in mind, you could leave the saga right here. This is what I consider the second jumping off point in the series, since a lot of things get resolved and wrapped up in these 2 books. Now, the next question is, should you read past Children of Dune? The short answer is yes. If you're already 3 books deep, how could you not be curious as to where this story leads? Also, the last 3 books have a lot to offer. That brings us to God Emperor of Dune, which I have heard was meant as a bridge between 2 trilogies, with Dune, Dune Messiah, and Children of Dune being the first trilogy, Heretics of Dune and Chapterhouse Dune being the first 2 parts of a second trilogy that Frank Herbert never got to finish. I'll admit that when I read the first 6 original Dune novels, God Emperor of Dune was my least favorite book in the series. I found it somewhat boring compared to the others, and not a lot happened. That is how I remember it anyway. I know that Quinn over at the channel Quinn's Ideas has said that God Emperor is his favorite book in the series, even over the first book, Dune itself. I do plan on rereading all 6 of the original Dune novels in the future, so maybe my opinion of God Emperor of Dune will change. It has been well over a decade since I first read God Emperor of Dune, and I've changed since then. Also, my understanding of Dune and what Frank Herbert was trying to say has deepened, so I look forward to the reread. After getting my way through God Emperor of Dune, it was totally worth it for the next 2 books, Heretics of Dune and Chapterhouse Dune, as humanity starts to make its way back in from the Great Scattering. We are introduced to some really cool ideas in these books, like the Honored Matres. They are the mirror image of the Bene Gesserit, but way more dark. Also, we are introduced to the No Ship, a ship that can cloak itself from prescience. I really enjoyed these 2 books, especially Chapterhouse Dune. Now, the one thing about these 2 books is that Chapterhouse Dune ends on a cliffhanger, which makes sense if this was supposed to be a second trilogy. How Frank Herbert intended to end the series with his 7th Dune book, well, we can only wonder. So keep that in mind going into these 2 books. With that said, these 2 books are totally worth reading. Also, this is the 3rd jumping off point in the story, Some people leave it right here, and they are fine wondering who, what, and why as to the ending of Chapter House. Okay, so now you've read all 6 of Frank Herbert's Dune saga, and Chapter House Dune ended on a cliffhanger. Are you curious as to the final end to this story? As far as official Dune canon is concerned, the story has an ending. But should you read it? Now that decision is a much tougher one to make. Now we will venture into the books that make up the expanded Dune universe, all written by Frank Herbert's son, Brian Herbert, and his co-writer, Kevin J. Anderson. They claim to have found notes and an outline left behind by Frank Herbert for a 7th Dune novel that gave the Dune saga an ultimate conclusion that they decided to split into 2 Dune novels. There is part of the Dune fandom that reject the expanded Dune books. They are very skeptical if Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson found anything belonging to Frank Herbert, and if they did, they strayed very far off from what he had originally intended. There is, however, another part of the Dune fandom that really enjoy these books, and some even like them over Frank Herbert's original Dune books. As for myself, I enjoyed most of the books that I have read by these 2. However, when I first read their continuation to Frank Herbert's saga, I knew that it was nowhere near the level of writing or storytelling that I had come to expect from a Dune book. Still, I found the expanded Dune universe novels to be an entertaining read, and I did look forward to them coming out. I've never looked at them as canon to the original Dune books. I've always viewed them as a guess or interpretation of what Frank Herbert might have intended. I've viewed these books as an alternate canon. That way, the mysterious ending to Chapter House Dune will always stay mysterious to me, and I can speculate to myself what it might have meant. That is just my own personal headcanon. Okay, with that said, you've decided to read on, and see how the whole Dune saga gets wrapped up in Dune 7, which got split in half and made into Hunters of Dune and Sandworms of Dune. Hold up, you can't just jump into those books right away. Oh no. You see, Brian and Kevin wrote 6 Dune novels that set up a lot that gets resolved in Hunters of Dune and Sandworms of Dune. So if you're going to go down this path, this is the best road you can take, albeit a long one. Before the saga started by Frank Herbert could be resolved, it had been some years since there was a new Dune novel. So instead of jumping right in with the conclusion, Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson wanted to reintroduce readers to the world of Dune. So they released Dune House Atreides in 1999. This would be a prequel series and would be the first in a trilogy of books known as the Prelude to Dune Trilogy. It would be followed up by Dune House Harkonnen and concluded in Dune House Carino. I remember first seeing Dune House Atreides in the catalog for the science fiction book club that I used to be a member of. I ordered all 3 books at the same time and couldn't wait to read them. I thought they were fairly solid science fiction books, and I also thought the middle book was the weakest one of the 3. However, I could tell that they were planting seeds for something bigger in this trilogy. That is why it is important to start here with their books. After wrapping up their first trilogy, they wasted no time on releasing their second trilogy. This would be known as the Legends of Dune Trilogy. It would be another prequel and take place far in the past of the Dune storyline, starting with Dune the Butlerian Jihad in 2002, followed up by Dune the Machine Crusade and Dune the Battle of Corran. This trilogy deals with the time that human minds had been enslaved by thinking machines. I've always suspected that this is where the 2 diverged wildly from what Frank Herbert had intended. When reading the Dune Encyclopedia, this conflict seems much more ideological and doesn't paint such a black and white picture like these series of books. Where a group of radical humans wage war from planet to planet, forcing each world to surrender its AI technology, whether that world wanted to surrender it or not, which ended up causing a lot of harm to the humans of those planets in the aftermath. It seems to me, and this is purely my own speculation, that they changed the story to make it much more commercial and palatable to readers, but that is a whole other video. In this version, evil machines have enslaved most of humanity, and a nightmarish Terminator-like future, a much more cliched approach to the story. However, I have to admit that out of all the stuff I've read belonging to Brian and Kevin's expanded Dune saga, this trilogy was by far my favorite. When one stops trying to measure this against what Frank Herbert wrote, this trilogy of books was really fun to read. It was unto itself a vast space opera filled with action. Compared to the Dune house books, I found these books to be much better and more entertaining. Also, even more than the first Housebooks trilogy, the Legends trilogy really sets up a lot of stuff that will pay off in Hunters of Dune and Sandworms of Dune. Essentially, these 6 books really set the stage for Hunters and Sandworms. If you jump right into those books without first reading these 6, you're going to be somewhat confused. Which brings us on to Hunters of Dune and Sandworms of Dune, the long-awaited conclusion to the Dune saga. These are 2 more books that I really looked forward to and couldn't wait to read them. I picked them up as soon as they became available at my local bookstore. Hunters of Dune is my second favorite Dune book written by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson, coming in second to the Legends of Dune trilogy. I found this book to be very entertaining and a page-turner. I remember when I read it, I couldn't put it down. Unfortunately, the follow-up book and ultimate conclusion, Sandworms of Dune, I found disappointing, and I didn't have nearly as much fun reading it as I did Hunters of Dune. I didn't find it a page-turner. As for the ultimate climax and revelation of the saga, well, I'll let you find that out on your own if you decide to go down this rabbit hole. Now, this is the 4th and final jumping off point in the Dune saga. These 2 books complete the story started in Frank Herbert's Dune. After the 6 original Dune books, 2 prequel trilogies, and all that being concluded in Hunters of Dune and Sandworms of Dune. Now that the 2 writers had completely blown their wad on these 2 books, where could they go after this? Well, they did take it somewhere. However, this is where I decided to step off the train, somewhat. I myself could see nowhere else to go with the story that would be interesting. However, if you are interested in reading even more Dune stories, there are more and more on the way. This is where we go into what I call supplemental reading, but unnecessary reading. Some of these books I own, but have never read. Others I may pick up in the future. The first 2 books that fall into what I call the supplemental reading category, starting with Hall of Dune, published in 2008, and followed up the next year by The Winds of Dune. These 2 books were originally part of a 4-book series, which would have been followed up by Throne of Dune and Leto of Dune. I own both these books, but have yet to read them. I remember buying both these books with the intention of reading them right away. However, I felt after the story was completely wrapped up in Sandworms of Dune, also having read both prequel trilogies, I found I had very little motivation to read on with the Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson stuff. Also, at this point, I felt like the series of books was beginning to go into the milking phase. I can understand wanting to continue your father's legacy and finishing the story that he started. After that, however, it seemed the 2 were going to wring every nickel out of the Dune franchise that they could. After those 2 books, they would release another trilogy called The Great Schools of Dune Prequel Trilogy, starting with Sisterhood of Dune, published in 2012, and followed up by Mentats of Dune, and concluded with Navigators of Dune. From my understanding, this series is a sequel to the Legends of Dune trilogy, and follows the characters that were established in that series. I myself have never bought or read these Dune books. Then there is Tales of Dune, a collection of Dune short stories by Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson. Of the recent Dune books available by these 2 writers, I find this one gets my interest the most, and I recently bought a copy. Now, I must admit, a lot of the reason why I bought a copy of this book was that I absolutely loved the cover art. The second book, The Road to Dune, is like a deleted scenes / special features companion to the Dune saga. I found a copy of this book at my local Value Village some years ago. I haven't read it yet, but plan to sometime in the future. Recently, Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson has released the first part of a new Dune trilogy of books, beginning with Dune, the Duke of Caladan, which will be followed up by Dune, Lady of Caladan. That covers the books that I feel are supplemental to the rest of the Dune saga. I'll eventually get around to reading them over the years, but as for right now, I feel no great rush to do so. Where to start? Easy. Where to end? That's tougher. However, one thing is certain. If you're really hungry for Dune, it is a saga that spans 23 books and counting. I hope this video helped you with some important questions regarding your journey through the Dune books, whether you stop at just the first book or go on right to the end. I hope you have fun reading. And that's everything I got to say in this video. Let me know what you think in the comments section, and I will see you at the next one. I'd like to say thank you to all of my subscribers. I appreciate you all in helping this channel grow. If you're new to the channel, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Also, don't forget to hit the bell icon so you'll be notified when new videos are uploaded.